Hello and welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to high quality in the early years and school-age care sector. In our episodes, we've a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This podcast series is proudly supported by Arachas Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products. So have a look at www.arachas.ie for more information. In this series, we're looking at communicating. We're familiar with the Reggio Emilia term, the 100 languages of children. So over the coming episodes, we're going to look at some of these 100 languages, what that term means and how it impacts on children in our settings. So for this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Cliodhna Noonan. Cliodhna is an established early years arts performer and event manager. She speaks 7 languages, which is really impressive, and founded Acting Up Arts in 2009 to advocate for early years arts as an art form with the then Arts Council Young People, Children Education section. She also founded the Grasshoppers International Early Years Festival in 2019, and she's the chairperson of that organisation today. So, Cliodhna, you're really welcome, and thank you for coming on Early Childhood Ireland's podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
So you've sent in a very impressive bio on the various programs and networks that you're involved in. Can you quickly take us through some of those, including your residency at ATU at the moment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting to even hear it said like that. I think when I'm asked to write a bio, I immediately slightly panic because I've had a very rich and varied life so far, and I've lived in many different countries. So I suppose it's picking and choosing which bits of those are relevant to whatever it is that I'm applying to. I am a member of the Small Size European Union Network Association, and that has undergone its own changes, but the focus is on performing arts for early years. So there's a huge network now available, and that includes expertise and organizations. I think it began in about 11 countries, and it has spread to about 34 members all over the world now as well. So that's really exciting whenever we get together and share practice and expertise. And that network is its own member of the ASATEJ International Network, which would be for all age groups of children, performing arts, predominantly theatre, but they are exploring dance as well, for children up to age 18 and some youth programs up to age 25. But my focus is primarily on the early years. And I was delighted, absolutely thrilled this year to have been selected to be an artist in residence at ATU in Ireland. I'm working in collaboration with the early childhood departments in Galway and in Mayo, in Castlebar, on those campuses. We've had a couple of visits already, and it's great. It's super. My role is to present what I do, to work with audiences, which would be this within this age group, to work with early years settings in the morning time, and then to work in the same way actually with the student educators in the afternoon in both universities, which is really interesting to try to advocate for the reasons why we need creativity and arts in the room with us all the time.
I think it's so important that students in their kind of formation as early years educators, if you want to use that term, are being exposed to this, because I think it will make the early years settings and school age settings that they're working in even richer, because children will have that kind of constant exposure to the arts and creativity and storytelling and performance, rather than it being maybe a once a year thing at Christmas where, somebody comes in or they go to a theatre. And, when we were chatting about the podcast before, I was kind of saying that the children need that constant exposure to it, as well as it being kind of a one-off treat. But that, and you use the term, what was it, performance literacy, which I thought was lovely. So I'm looking forward to teasing some of those some of those things out a bit more with you as we go through and hearing your experiences. So I started there, Cliodhna, by saying about that term, the 100 languages of children that we hear talked about a lot in Reggio, and of course, communicating is a theme of Ash there. So, can you tell us your thoughts on that concept of the 100 languages of children? What it means. It's clearly not 100 spoken languages, so the other ways in which children communicate and how that kind of links to the theme of Ash there, from your perspective as an early years artist and performer.
Yeah, sure. Well, what was very interesting for me was that I've done that backwards in my work, in that I began my own journey with an 18-month-old baby, my own son, sitting on my knee, and I really desperately wanted to see a show that had come into a theatre in Bucharest, in Romania, where we were living, because I was fascinated by the age group, and I was thinking I had a huge bag of things, because I said he is never going to sit and listen, because listening is a huge part of the communication process, the two-way listening that's going on as well. And I was very nervous of that. I was trained as an adult actor, and I thought, how can an 18-month-old sit through 40 minutes of a real theatre performance on a stage? And of course, I was absolutely gobsmacked. And when I came out afterwards, I questioned why I needed it all to bring this huge bag of distractions with me, thinking that that would keep my son quiet. And so there began my journey, because I saw the skill and I saw the talent, and I thought, ooh, I'm not sure we do this yet in Ireland. And that was in 2007. And so when I came back, I started advocating really strongly for this, on the basis that, yeah, my experience was abroad, where there were, I mean, the physical language differences were enormous. And so I suppose we were immersed, me with my young children, in those 100 languages directly, and it continued. We moved from Romania to Egypt, and then from Egypt to Lithuania. So we're only back in Ireland as kind of young adults. My children are. And communication to me meant lots and lots of different ways of listening to each other, lots and lots of different ways. Some were visual arts based, some were drawing, some were imaginary. If we can't make friends with the people there, we imagine new friends. And those, can't make friends is not necessarily because of who you are, but it could be because of a language barrier, or just insecurity. Feelings of insecurity can be trauma based. All of those experiences come from life stories, even if you're only 3 years old. And some of them are barriers to communication. And I think I set up stories to explore how I, as a performer, could develop my own work. And I haven't stopped since, basically. So the first story that I made, and each experience to me was heavily rooted in me wanting to share something that I know with a group of children under the age of 6. And I would like the message to have been that they would listen to me for a little bit of time, and that I would be interesting enough to listen to. And so that's where the journey began. Then I started to ask myself the questions, the honest questions about, well, what is it that I want to tell? How can my story be interesting and be mine, so that then it's very interesting to share with them? I might have got a bit waylaid there. Does that answer some of your
It
questions?
it it does, and
Yeah.
what you started with about your son, and assuming you'd need to distract him while you engaged
Oh,
in something that you like. That reminded me of the that middle bit of the Ashler wheel that talks about competent and confident, seeing children as confident and competent learners,
yeah.
and the more we see them as confident and competent, the more they can amaze us with, that when something like, just like you say, is engaging to them, they can, their focus and their attention and their listening skills can amaze us sometimes.
And I think the strongest memory I have, because I don't know what was going through Joe's head, but my memory is that I was terrified that he was going to be the child to make all the noise and run around and knock things over and not do what he was supposed to do. And I was so scared. I held him too tight. I made all of those mistakes that I share now with families who come to me for the first time. and who maybe we do some of those exercises, where one of the most powerful exercises I ever did in the training for this was working with a colleague who sat very close to me, and I pushed my arms really strongly around her and held her tightly, and it's not a nice feeling at all. And the second part of that exercise would be where you sit completely open and you try to hear each other's hearts beating. And in that silence and in that acceptance, there's such an openness that actually nobody moves. You don't feel like you have to go anywhere else because you feel safe. But there's a huge security of presence in that. And I think that is something that I strive to present in my work. But I also, in this new program with educators, I'm considering how educators can also have that confidence and ability to make the children feel safe in that environment enough that they will sit and listen without a need for disciplinary action or anything like that. It's kind of like a switch you flip in your head, I think, where you just have to trust.
Yeah. And it's that, I think there's that bit about, appropriate expectations,
Yeah.
making whatever you're doing in that creative space engaging to children, but that they're not forced to sit and watch and listen, that it's following their lead, responding to them, and where their interests lie.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as well there is a question arising as I go through this process now this year with new settings who haven't worked with me before. And there is a process where I'm wondering about the crying child. The child that's crying at the very beginning is communicating something very strong. And how do we listen to that? So if the child is crying because they are ill or in pain, no amount of me being brilliant is actually going to keep them in the room because they're
Mm,
trying to communicate something else. If the child is crying because they've been frightened, okay, that's on me. If the child
mm,
is crying maybe because it's a new setting, it's a new environment, then they need time. And sometimes they're whipped up out of the room and removed so the other children can listen. But in my heart, I always feel that they're the interesting children to hold on to and hang on, or leave the door open so they can sit outside the door if they want to.
mm,
And this is a process that I'm asking myself as well. And then we had I've just begun to work with Ukrainian families as well in my practice where I am and over in the West as well. And that's very interesting because there's a language barrier, which is I'm a very wordy performer. So there is, and we had a translator who was lovely, but then she was so emotionally involved in the story herself that she started to find it difficult to translate then as well, which was very interesting. And yeah, and I think that the it's important as now I'm very lucky because the stories are mine and the scripts are mine and they're very general and they're very flexible. And that's why I would call it more advocacy performance than direct full scale theatre performance, in that I'm very interested in developing a performance literacy in an audience so that they can go out then and buy tickets or be interested to go to a bigger theatre where there is a full show, where the responsibility on you as an audience member is then quite different to what I would be doing day to day. And that for a 3-year old as much as for a 10-year-old.
mm,
So I think the skills that I would be looking for in developing during my presence in an early years setting would be listening skills, concentration skills, gently advocating for, when something is new in your space, you don't need to be afraid, that it can be a very pleasant and a lovely experience for everybody as well. So we were trained as well along the years to, it's not so good to have them sitting on a fourth wall in the room. In some of my work, I do have that, but I would actually break that and come out to them as well in character. As much as possible, they should be at eye level with you. But
mm,
sometimes that's not possible. And I'm not tall, but I'm a fully grown adult. So there is an element there of, playing with that idea, but they should definitely be close to you as much as possible. So the most Welcoming space for me is a blank room with very little on the walls where I can choose how to set the space so that they're sitting close to me and are ready to listen. The sets all fit in the boot of my car, and they're quite small because for me the most important thing is this in exchange of communication and feeling in the room when I'm
And
there. So.
and do you use props?
Oh gosh, yes, yeah. So I was actually wondering, I was thinking I could probably tell you a little bit because the two pieces that are on the go at the moment, I have two new pieces in production, which is great. But the two pieces that are, each of them is 11 years old at this stage, and they're still on the go. So one is called Silver Tree, and it's based on a Romanian legend of this fairy that they call Ursitoarea, and it's become horribly commercialized in Romania. And when I came across it, I thought, oh gosh, there must be an ancient story behind that. And there is. So she's a fate fairy who arrives on the seventh day of a baby's life. She flies in the window, and the parents have left a tray of whatever they consider they can offer to this fairy for the baby to have a good life. And I use health, wealth, and knowledge as my gifts. And what happens usually as well, because the question I was looking for as well is how do babies make choices? And this is very interesting in terms of communication. If you have three things on a tray, and I also, at the time I devised it, I wanted to look at the color silver because I think it's really interesting as well. And I was thinking of saucepans that my children loved just, not just making noise with, but also looking at their reflections in. And this color silver is very fascinating for babies. So those were the two questions behind me. And then I linked those with this story of the fairy. So I simply present health, wealth, and knowledge with old music from the 1950s and 60s, with my voice, with poetry. Very few words actually in it. There's only 3 lines of words. And then we go round one by one and we choose a gift. And they're obviously not allowed to take it. So it's really about making a choice. And, it's fascinating how long it takes some of the children to understand that they can choose and how they choose. Some of them are only able to show you with their eyes. They'll glance very briefly, and then you'll be able to see that's the gift they've chosen. Others will point, others will lift it and put it back again. And small babies actually show me with their feet.
Okay,
They kick their
their
feet,
feet.
and you can hold them up one at a time, and the feet kicking is different for each baby. So I was fascinated by this, and some cultures that we've lived in, where the children make a choice, where one child makes a clear choice, say these would be children who are in an earlier setting as opposed to babies, everybody follows. Everybody makes the same choice. There's no difference. Once one
Mm,
child speaks, they all speak. This isn't the case in Ireland. Everybody has very strong opinions about their own individual choices, which is good to see. But it's even culturally interesting to see how do we communicate and how scary it is when you say to somebody, okay, your friend made that choice, but what about you? What would you like? Some children have never ever been asked that question. What would
mm,
you like? And then at the library space we just went to under the ATU residency, there was a group of there was a women's group meeting, and we invited them because the space was open. We invited them to share at the back of the room, and this was fabulously intergenerational then. So these women knew the songs, knew the music, loved the story, and provided a fabulous backdrop to the small, small, small children and the worried parents who were sitting in the room. And there was just such an atmosphere of connection. I think it's been one of my favorite presentations of that piece so far. And I can change it as I go. And always, actually, what's interesting again for communication in my work, I always felt that 23 minutes is more than enough to sit and listen. And then I would change to do some sort of a reflective piece. So either they make something with their hands, or we dance together, or we use another method of communicating with each other to embed what we've just learned or just absorbed from watching me. So if I'm working with junior or senior infant classes who would be maybe 4 to 6 year olds with that story, we give them each a blue card and a silver ribbon, and they draw or they speak about or they use stickers to describe the choice they made. and we put the date on it and a name, and they take it home. If they're very small babies, maybe we make a little shaker. The parents make a little shaker and they put the wish inside the shaker. And then we add a bit of rice and we show them how you can make this with a vitamin bottle or an Actimel yogurt pot, or, something that's at home with a bit of tape wrapped around it as well. And then you have a musical instrument. So it depends who the group is that we're working with, how we encourage the learning to continue after the experience. So that's Silver Tree.
Lovely.
And
That
the
is,
set
yeah.
for that is literally a silver tree that was made in Cairo, and is has silver branches and a huge, it's a 4 meter diameter blue carpet that we all sit on together.
Okay.
I still find some families prefer to have chairs. They'll ask for chairs, but my
Mm,
ideal is where everybody is sitting on the floor. If I'm in an earlier setting and I'm working with educators, they're sitting on the floor with me,
mm.
and the children.
Yeah, that
So
that eye level bit is so important for
yeah,
communication,
yeah,
even at story time, regular story time in a setting, children, it's just
yeah,
can be so difficult to even see the pictures or explore the props or whatever if the adult is,
yeah.
2 feet above them, like you say.
Yeah. And within that story there are feathers, because it's 12 years old, that one. So I was really exploring what we knew worked, as sensory elements. So there are feathers, there's a little like a rattle with a beautiful noise. I think it's a some sort of a professional shaker, or I'm not sure where it came from at this stage, I don't remember. But the sound is gorgeous on it. And so there's an audio element to that, and I don't let the children hold it. It's above their heads, so they suddenly realize they can look up. Um, and then I move on to the next child quickly, and that's interesting. There are children who will say, "Oh, me," but as soon as they realize that it's moving on and that it's not going to stay with them. It's rare somehow to have a child have a tantrum or want, and that's, I'm not sure why that is, whether my communication at this stage is clear enough that they understand that that wasn't the offer.
Mm,
I didn't take anything from them. I come close to them, I offer the sound, and then we move on and offer to the next child. But that I find quite interesting as well. And then every child gets a little feather. It's the book that represents knowledge has feathers inside it.
okay.
So if you're a child who isn't really absorbing the words or the music, then those elements help you to listen, definitely. Um, there was one other one as well. Oh, it's an apple that goes around, a silver
Okay.
apple. And they tell me what kind of fruit it looks like. So you're looking at visual, and that might have nothing to do with the story, but they might understand. Oh, she's asking me to say a fruit. Okay.
Right. Right.
Um.
And I suppose that brings me to something, I feel in terms of communicating, we tend to think of, the written word, in terms of writing and reading, and that, they're key aspects to literacy. And, and parents, we want children to be able to read and write, and,
Yeah.
literacy is seen as a very, key and important, and it is, of course it
Yeah.
is. But that bit of the foundation of written literacy is oral literacy.
Mm.
And that bit that if a child hasn't an extensive vocabulary, they can't write because they haven't got the words to write, or they can't they when they're reading words, if they're not familiar with the oral aspect of it, their comprehension of what's being read to them or what they're reading themselves as they get older can be impacted.
Yeah.
So, I think it's something that we need to pay an awful lot of attention to in early years, is the importance of oral language, and, supporting children to speak. And then as they're listening to, have that comprehension of the words that they're being exposed to. So, can you tell us how your work supports that or the acquisition of oral language in young children?
Oh, I think it's embedded in that as well, in that
Completely. Yeah.
yeah, I would never be looking for something written by the children other than an expression of what they have just been through. But that would be, some children aren't even able to hold the crayon yet, they'll chew it, or the marker or whatever we're offering. So we would never have the written focus. But I think what I like to see, especially there's a piece I do called Dream Train, and it is at the very beginning I would say to them, we need some destinations. And I have been asked, why do you use this word? And I say, because it's lovely, because it's, I like this word, destination. You can eat it, and the children will try it immediately. Some of them don't understand what it is. And we play with pulling where we would like to go on a train, pulling this idea out of our head and putting it into the driver's hat, and that's a destination. And we open curtains, and that's a destination behind the curtain. So slowly they'll come to understand what that word is. But I'm a wordy person. I like oral communication. So it's my favorite form of communicating with children. And it's really interesting. Now my work has shifted in that 12 years ago, I would have maybe delivered the story allowing the children. In Dream Train, there's a massive call and answer section. So when the curtain opens, you'll have the children say, "Oh, it's a forest," and the train has stopped in a forest. And I will ask, "So who lives in the forest? Does anybody know why we're here?" And they will, they'll offer those solutions. And sometimes teachers or educators will say to me that the children who answered those questions are children who rarely speak in class or rarely offer an opinion. So there's something about it being in a new space with a safe and interesting driver. I'm dressed as a Dream Train driver, asking you that question that makes them very excited to answer however they can. And
Or
you
even
have,
the visual prompt, maybe that
I
they're,
would say very much
that
so the
it's,
visual. Yeah, it's very visual. There's no, and you couldn't possibly, like, there's no wrong,
mm,
because all the answers, because it's a fantastical journey, all the answers are correct. Just I
mm,
might say, oh, we might go there tomorrow night, but I think someone's calling us here tonight. So I can change it back to me without saying, no, that's wrong. And that's what's really interesting about the arts process for me, is that I will always listen to the children when they are trying to tell me something, even to understand the words. And now we are switching to, there's moments, and I say we as a collective in the room, there are moments when I don't understand the language of the child. So I'm repeating what the child is saying in a different language that they might use at home. And I love that. I don't
that's,
know if I'm
yeah,
learning the right words or not, but I am learning their words, and it gives them huge confidence
absolutely.
to
Yeah.
not be asked to say that in English, please, but to actually hear somebody who does speak English speak it back to them in their own language. It
Yeah.
changes everything in their minds and in their hearts. And I really like that. And more with the educators in the room also. We had a Spanish speaking educator recently in the room, and he was thrilled that we were counting in Spanish. I can't even remember what we were doing during the show, but it required counting. And so instead of doing it in English, we did it in Spanish. And, it changed everything for him as well. So in terms of the stories, there's two things. The stories are, it's very oral, the experience with me. I am very much using myself, my voice, to tell the story and to use words that they may not have heard before. But then there's also that the fact that the stories are based on old legendary characters. So, or songs that I knew as a child. So the Dream Train has this Morningtown Ride song where that's how they drive the train. We all sing rock and roll and riding together.
Yeah.
The
Train
Silver
whistle
Tree,
blowing.
yeah, the train whistle blowing. So it's
Yeah.
all in there. Like I didn't have to do much with it. And the silver tree is this character that is still in folkloric tradition in villages in Romania. So it's a slightly different version of it, but it's passing it on to a new generation. And I think that's incredibly important as generations mix and change and as history unfolds. It's a lovely way to pass all of those words and legends on to the next generation. and I'm
And
working
has
on
it
a
kind of
new.
evolved, the story and the props? Has it kind of evolved
Well,
over the years, or?
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Now I would use original music, say, when I'm coming in. I didn't have the courage to do that originally, but now I do, and I'm working on a new story. There's a video version of it from the pandemic is online, and like I say, I did a sensory sheet and I sent the video out to anybody who wanted it, and she's called the Shell Whisperer. And the idea was that we were only entering into the pandemic at the time. And I think my children were entering the 14 to 16 age group, which is quite like it's full of anxieties about the world nowadays. And I was asking the questions myself about how does the parent manage with anxiety and worry. And so I came up with the idea of this character who comes out of the sea and she finds shells on the beach, and the children have whispered their deepest worries into the shells. And she collects them and she brings them back to her home, and she works all night to change them into dreams instead. And then she sends them back out so they'll become sand in the future with the tide. And that's the story. That's it. But it's in development at
That's
the moment.
beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. But that is me, this is what's interesting. I don't think I'm ever going to have like massive sets and huge teams behind me. I don't see things evolving like that, but I like to keep my presence in the room as sensitive and honest and emotional for people to be there as possible, because I think it's
So,
becoming rarer and rarer to be able to have that moment together. And we
yeah.
do one other show, which is called Mora, which is beginning to travel now. And it was also created during the pandemic, but in a different way, in that I did work with a little team of people who I know down through the years. And I thought, oh, I wonder what would happen if we all worked together. But each of us had a different role. So, and in terms of our communication with each other as adults, and sometimes I wonder about this with groups of children when we ask them to do group work on anything. In that session of work, we each had a role that the others really couldn't do. And as a team, we worked incredibly well together and we had a great time. And I often wonder, when we ask small children to do something, do we take their personalities into account, or do we just ask them, right, the four of you do this, and the four of you do this, and the four of you do this? But if you know those children really well, you should know who could work with whom. And unless the exercise is to work under adverse conditions, whatever you're asking them to do will work a lot better if you take their personalities into, because that was my situation as well. And the piece that came out of that is called Mora. She's a tea lady who lives in a forest, and she has three little sprites who live with her, and they are all worried that she's throwing a tea party in the house. And I suppose maybe in the background we were also thinking about the pandemic.
Mm.
We were also thinking about not being able to meet, and about it finished at the time when things began to open up again. So there was this question of, it was supposed to have been, when you have small children who don't really want strangers coming in, but mum really wants to have a coffee morning with friends in the
Mm.
house, or and so, they might make trouble for you. They won't let you finish your sentences. They won't. So these are the creatures who live in the house with her. We never see them. We can only hear them. And then there is her own moment where she's resolved all the problems. She's set everybody down. Everything's grand. She takes a deep breath, and then she realizes she hasn't put the kettle on for the guests. And so she has her own moment of blind panic. But it's really interesting how, like, we're only at the beginning of rolling that out. And a lot of things that I was expecting the children to communicate to me haven't happened. It's been much nicer. And
Right.
so even this far on, I had no idea how, through the story, through her fixing one little character after another with a cup of tea and calming them down, there's this lovely empathy built up between the children and the character of Mora. So where she has her own meltdown and she's like, "Oh, I can't believe that happened," and "Oh, what am I going to do? And it's not perfect and it's all spoiled," which sounds like a panic. And I was like, how can I do that in an early years show? The children actually started to say, "Can we give her a hug? will it all be better? And they weren't worried. They were feeling an empathy that was going to manage the situation together with her. And I really wasn't expecting that in children so young. And also at the end, we were saying, right, we'll have our visual arts moment. So we bring out tiny little teacups and they can decorate them. And the idea is that they will take them home as a keepsake. But it was fascinating that because the story, she keeps saying, and you're all invited to my tea party, and it's going to begin any minute now. Once I've just solved a couple of little things and I've set the table, it's going to begin, and we're going to have a tea party. So at the end, they had no interest in decorating the teacups. They wanted the teapots, and they were pouring tea and chatting to each other. And I had goosebumps watching it. I was like, oh my goodness, they actually are having a little tea party together and chatting away.
Yeah.
And there was a small baby in the audience in Donegal, and he not only was like absolutely engaged in everything, he was at the pointing stage. So he kept pointing to the lights and pointing. Then he pointed to the tea bag, and he spent about 5 minutes literally trying to put the tea bag into the cup, as I had done 3 times during the show. That was the only thing he wanted to do. He was nonverbal yet. He was only making, little sounds that were,
Babbling.
yeah, yeah, very small. And the dad was fantastic with them. And he was just trying to plop his little tea bag into his cup. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful way to learn that moment of, I don't, it's not cause and effect, but it's in and out, when they go through putting a load of things into something and then
Yeah.
spitting them out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's learnt this moment with a tea bag and a cup
Mm.
through a theatre performance.
Yeah. But going back to what you said about interest a few minutes ago,
Yeah,
that's, if you do have to group children,
yeah,
it's their interest, their prior knowledge, playing to their strengths, and you
yeah.
avoid those adverse moments with young children because, that you don't need to do that. It's, following their interests and not forcing the decorating of the cups if that's not where
Not at all.
the
No, no,
interest
no.
is. It's, seeing what evolves, and you know planting the seed
Yes,
and
and
then
I
watching where it goes.
yes, and I suppose I'm very lucky in the field that I work in, that, like I say, the work belongs to me. If there's a need to change it a little bit or be a bit flexible with it, I can. And that I think is how I like to work as an early years artist. And I think what I would like to believe is that it's growing a literacy in the children who are coming to these shows in listening, that they're becoming able to be critical listeners and thinkers, and that by the time they're 5 or 6, going to the theatre should be normal. It should be something that's so inbuilt in their, no, I wouldn't say everyday experience, because it'll never be every day, but at least a couple of times a year, if it's in the program, that they do this. And if it's
Mm,
in purpose-built spaces where there is this eye-to-eye contact and where it's suitable for them. So it isn't about banging your feet on the chair and, putting the chair up and down and making noise for half an hour,
mm.
but it really is an engagement with, um,
Being immersed.
completely immersed at their level in the room with them, but then presenting a theatre experience. I think that it would be really exciting if
Yeah.
it was embedded.
So for educators listening to this who, may not have the opportunity to, have an artist visit, or who haven't had, prior training, like the educators of the future that you're working with
Yeah,
in ATU, have you a couple of tips and suggestions on how they can start to um, do this kind of work with young children in settings?
absolutely. I think um, one of the preparatory exercises that we're doing with the students around the work is, so when they come into the room, for example, there's music on, there's lights on full, the chairs are in the wrong place, and it's deliberately set up so that they would be uncomfortable trying to watch or listen to me for any length of time, the way the room is set up and the questions posed to them. But everybody has different answers to these questions. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. is, say you want to present a story, then look at the lighting around you. Look at how the space is. Are there still toys all over the floor? How is the space set up for the children who you want to come and be engaged in the story at that time? Are you telling them to come? Are you inviting them to come just by sitting with the book in your hand and making eye contact? Because that can be very interesting, and inviting them through that to come and sit with you. When you're sitting in the space and say, is there anything else going on? Can you hear the kitchen preparing something? Can you hear, is there a radio on? Is there something else happening in the room with a different group of children that could potentially be very distracting in terms of the noise that's already in their heads? I mean, we don't need pure silence, but certainly, if you're going to make it an arts experience for them, then yeah, it would be very interesting to think about how to. And yeah, the last thing is the lighting in the space. Can you turn the lights down? Can you use a little battery light instead? Can you make it very inviting in a very simple way so that all of you can breathe a little bit and enjoy the experience? And where that's not possible, if you can't turn your lights off, or can you pull over a curtain on a window? Can could you throw a sheet over your shelves of toys so that they can't see them, and sit on the ground in front of that? And for people who are not comfortable telling stories themselves, can you ask the children to help you with the story? Can you use a little prop that you've forgotten the name of and invite them to help you along with that by giving you the word, and then you use the word as they say it? Or even it's like, it can't be wrong if you invite them to give you the answer. So and then maybe you can remember the word you wanted to use when you say that word. So if it doesn't come out quite right, that you can then, that's right, that's the word I wanted, thank you very much. Because children think they're saying the right word, so it just doesn't come out often in the correct way. So I would really look at the environment you're trying to present the experience in, and see if there's two or three things that you can do to change it around for a few minutes, so that it's a really peaceful and calm place to sit down and tell a story, even if your story is not peaceful, even if your story is about Boo for Halloween, or it really is encouraging to the mind to have space and quiet around it so that you can focus on what it is you want to do. And by and large, you'll have a lot of children engaged, and then you'll be able to figure out why the one or two who are not engaging may not be engaging at that point in time. It's much easier if everybody else is kind of breathing deeply and settled into that setting. Does that help in any
It
way?
does. And I like that you took the example of maybe another group of children doing something else, that it's
Yeah.
not, that entire group, be it,
Oh no, no.
10 toddlers or wobblers, or
Yeah,
22 preschoolers, that, it's a smaller group of interested children, and that bit of setting the scene and involving them from the beginning. Would that be kind of a
absolutely
summary?
essential. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a book that you're using. It can be a bucket full of interesting things that relate to your day at the seaside. It can be, I mean, the educators have the luxury. We have to do 20 minutes and then be gone after an hour, we'll say, and moving out. But educators who are there all day have the luxury maybe of being able to do that for 5 minutes, and then
Yeah.
move on to another area of the room and coming back with a different group of children and trying it
Mm.
again for another 5 minutes,
Yeah.
you know.
And doing it every day, maybe,
Oh,
or a couple of times a
absolutely.
week, rather than,
Absolutely. Yeah.
going back
And
to what I said at the start, that it's a richer experience if children have exposure
if
to
it's
it on a
constant,
more
yeah,
regular basis.
absolutely. And then, I mean, I fully believe the educators I've met on this journey are incredibly creative. But
Absolutely.
we all get a little bit bogged down with the paperwork that has to be done with, and so that becomes the priority, maybe over your creative ideas. So I think, I come across sometimes, oh, but I don't have the time to think about doing it like that. And that's such a shame, because I really believe that everyone has this ability. If you're in contact with small children that often, you couldn't not be creative inside. I mean,
Couldn't. Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
possible, you
But
know?
it's recognizing the creativity. And I suppose that we have
Yeah.
our 100 languages as well, but in some
Oh,
ways,
big
as
time.
we get
Yeah.
older, we kind of maybe lose them or forget we had them in the first place.
No, and I saw a beautiful piece recently which was dance based. And the same would apply there, you know. It's not about putting on loud nursery rhymes and everybody doing all the same, you know. This piece was amazing, and anybody could do this actually, as long as you're, and when you're an educator, you're aware of the safety issues. It's much easier than a family audience where maybe the parents wouldn't be as aware of what the safety issues are when there's a group of small children in the room. So they cleared a space and put on a very gentle piece of like almost classical music, but not even that rich in sound, just more, there were more, two or three instruments playing this lovely air. And the dancers sat on the floor and let the children lead the movement. And the children crawled. This would be particularly for the little wobblers and the crawlers, the ones who are very, very small still and only discovering still how their body moves. And the children led it to a certain extent. The dancers had a choreography that they would do every now and again over the children who were crawling on the floor, but that was their expertise. But a seed planted in my head, thinking, oh my goodness, couldn't you have a little space that's soft and gentle where if you put on even an old vinyl record, you know, or that sound, not the tinny kind of nursery rhyme sound, but a really lovely old song that you like, and watch how the children listen to it and then start to move like them. I mean, there's no rules surely in how we learn how to move our hands and legs as long as
Yeah,
we're
of
moving them.
course. Yeah.
So, and it gives you the freedom to feel really shy, first of all,
Mm,
as they do, and then to join in together. And again, that could happen if your space is set up so that that can happen once an hour for 3 minutes.
mm.
How wonderful would that be by the end? Even ourselves, we'd all feel like dancers by the end of it,
That's it.
you know?
And music is something that we're going to be looking at actually in the future episode of this series.
Oh,
So
fabulous.
and it's lovely to, that's another one of the 100 languages and
Absolutely.
how they link
Yeah.
together and support each other.
We had a discussion actually. I was at Babero Festival this week in Galway, and there was a panel discussion about collaboration between art forms. And one of the things that comes out very strongly in the early years sector is that it's quite rare to find only one art form in a piece that's designed for children between 0 and 6. They really combine movement, music, spoken word, and visual art. It's all in there usually somehow, for early years. So yeah, it's fascinating to see. It's quite hard to isolate them out and say, I'm only going to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And I think, that's what's so great about students having
yeah,
these experiences when they're doing their degrees. So they're
yeah,
bringing them into the settings and seeing themselves as I think sometimes we kind of think that creativity is something that you need an expert for,
yeah.
and you don't.
No.
And I think you've given us such great ideas and suggestions and
Oh, thank you.
inspiration today. So, Cliodhna, thanks a million for joining. It's been, just so interesting. Um,
Thank you very much.
and thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Arachas Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.